All right, so yeah, that's gonna be it for the eye, but I had a surprise. Hopefully you guys know that I released a course recently, Fundamentals of Digital Sculpting. If you haven't seen that, if you're new to sculpting, if you wanna learn that, definitely check it out. Where'd it go? Yeah, this one right here. But I sculpted this shark courtesy of Alyssa Vasey. Loved her artwork. Check that out if you're interested in sculpting the shark. But I created this shading and lighting scene, and as just to like spice up the visuals a little bit. Also to present the model in the best light possible. You've heard me probably talk about that a lot. That's what we're gonna do for the next, it might be an hour and a half, 2 hours actually. It's really fun. I think you'll find some interesting things, interesting tips and tidbits along the way. But yeah, we're gonna be shading and lighting this shark. If that keeps you interested, stick around. Let's get into that. We are gonna start with the shark that I ended the course with, Shark SNL00. Not gonna save that version. Okay, here we go. Let's begin. This is gonna be a little, there's gonna be a lot of objects going on, so we wanna stay organized from the start. We're going to call this shark, the shark collection. First thing I wanna do is create the ground that this shark will be swimming over. I think the ground just gives it a little more context and an opportunity for depth to show the depth of the ocean that the shark is swimming in. So I want to start with a UV sphere. I'm going to rotate it. I'm going to tab into edit mode, rotate 90 degrees so that I have the smoothest part of the sphere at the top. Let's hit Control 4 to make it really smooth. Also, I want to add a camera object. All right, we're going to hit 0 on the number pad, and we're looking through the camera now. Go to the view in the in panel, go to our view tab, and we want to change the lock camera to view. We want to turn that on. And now as I orbit around the scene, our camera is following along. So I just want to find a camera angle that I like that features the shark in the center, hovering above where the ground will be. Once I like it, disable lock camera to view, and now that it'll be stuck there. And I can scale up this sphere. Let's see, is that sphere? Oh, it's not in the center. Alt-G, Shift-C. I thought it felt off, and it was. All right, so I'm just going to scale the sphere up until it doesn't look, I don't want it to look like a sphere. I just want it to, I want the ground to look like it's kind of, I don't know, compositionally kind of pointed up towards the shark. Rather than a flat, boring ground, we'll just make it a little curved. Something like this. There we go. I think that's good compositionally. The camera, I'm going to move that outside the shark collection into the scene collection. Same thing with the sphere. I'm going to also select the scene collection so that anything I create goes there instead of the shark collection. All right, so we've got the bottom sphere, and this is only going to serve as a shrink wrap object for the actual ground geometry, which is going to be a circle. The reason I'm going with a circle is that I am envisioning this, intending this to be a turntable animation, which you've already seen in the trailer. So when it comes to a turntable, you want to think circular. And with that in mind, we've got a circle that's going to represent our ground. We're going to scale it up. 32 verts is the default, and that's going to be fine. I'm going to grid fill this. And also my little, quirk, so to speak, even though it really doesn't matter, I want this to align horizontally. I want the grid to be horizontal and vertical. I don't want it to be angled off kilter. All right, I want to scale the size of this ground just beyond the edges of the frame, okay? So this is a good scale. I can then add a shrink wrap modifier to our, and then target select the ground, the sphere. Perfect, so I've got my shape. It will be optimal because with the sphere, we've got all this extra geometry that's serving no purpose. I do like to use project and negative and positive distance. All right, that just sometimes gives a better result. So we can apply, is that straight? Okay, yeah. We want to apply this now. We can delete that old sphere. This one becomes the ground. That becomes the ground, and we're ready to make that detailed. And the way I've been doing this lately is taking advantage of Texture Haven, especially. I mean, you know that I use HDRI Haven all the time. Highly recommend these. These are from Greg Zoll, Texture Haven. All right, right now we've got Texture Haven and HDRI Haven, but he's also working on Model Haven. And this is 100% free. Sorry if you've seen this 100 times, but the quality here is amazing. It's professional quality on everything. And it's CC0, public domain, like no strings attached. So I use it all the time, obviously, but I am also a donor. I recommend that if you use this regularly, ensure that it can continue by considering a donation through his Patreon. I mean, it's a no-brainer for me at this point, as much as I use it. But we're going to come here and look at textures, specifically terrain textures. All right, so we've got a few options here. We don't want bricks, of course, but like something that represents the ground. It can really be anything because we're only going to be grabbing the displacement. But I'm not going to think too hard about it. I just want it to look like a muddy ocean floor. Not like a sandy ocean floor, like a smooth sandy one, but like kind of rocky. And so I like this brown mud dry. Let's use that. We want specifically the displacement because that's how we're going to be using it. And I'm going to just get the higher quality here, 8K for maximum detail and PNG. We'll download that. Jump back over to Blender. What I'm going to do here is, it might be too much for the stream to handle because we're going to be using really high level high-res topology by adding a subsurf. And we want to make this like 6 levels, really, really high. And then following that with a displacement modifier. So I'm going to save my scene real quick. Let's turn off subsurf, save the scene. I need to save it specifically. Yeah, okay. Rec Shark 01. Subsurf it really, really high so that it can capture the max detail for the displacement. We want to use that texture we just downloaded. So let's click new. I'm going to call this terrain. Click these little buttons to modify the texture specifically. We'll open that image that we just downloaded. Home downloads. Brown mud dry displacement 8K. Let's load that up. Might take a moment because it's it's only 56 megabytes or something. All right, let's go back to our modifier stack and enable the six levels of subdivision. Look at the solid view, and it looks terrible. Oh yeah, I forgot to lay out UVs. Let's jump over to UV editing tab, and we're already in edit mode. So let's hit U unwrap, and since it's a simple, circular mesh, it's gonna unwrap very easily. We can scale that down maybe. I don't know if it's important to scale down, but I like to scale it down just short of the borders. All right, now we can go back to, I think it was layout. And for the displacement modifier, let's switch the texture coordinates to be UV. And now we see a very, very easily generated, realistic, highly detailed terrain model. It's not quite as detailed as I want, so I just need to change the viewport subsurf up one more level. Okay, it seems to top out at 6. Let's go to 7 by manually typing. Okay, it works when you manually type it. Okay, this is going to be plenty. From here, we're going to apply it. Object, convert to mesh. Now we want to decimate it. This is what takes a while. We're at 1.4 million polys. So let's take that ratio down to let's go to 0.1. That should get it to around 100,000 faces, I believe. All right, so we're at 200,000. I guess the ratio is imperfect. If we press apply, again, we're going to calculate all over again for some reason. Spiky, do you know why? I feel like you're one of the more technical minds, and if you're still here, I'm curious if you would know why applying the modifiers recalculates again. Because some operations take a really long time, and it just sucks to have to do it twice. No idea, Kent. Well, thanks for responding, Spiky. Right, so this is our ground, our new ground geometry. We can shade it smooth, and this is going to show up very well as again, the ground and anything on the ground is not the focus, but it's going to paint a very full picture of the scene. And that's why I like to make it as detailed as possible with as little effort as possible. And I consider that process little effort. All right, so we've got a ground, we've got the shark. Let's start lighting the scene. We are going to use Eevee for the whole thing. So I'm going to add 2 sun lamps. One in the back, well, both in the back actually. These are going to serve as really bright rim lights. Keep in mind, this is a stylized type of look. So with one placed, I'm going to hit Z and let's go to rendered view. We can start to see that we're getting a rim light, which is what we want. Shift D to, not quite. Let me check the strength. I'm gonna make it slightly blue. And let's change the strength up to like 5. That looks pretty good. Shift D to duplicate it and then rotate it along the cursor, which should be in the center of the world. Let's rotate that around. I want both of them combined to give a really nice rim light to the shark. That's working pretty good. And then finally, we're going to add an area light as the key light. This is gonna just be kind of front and center. We're also gonna add some God rays, some like light shafts through the water. That's gonna come down from above. So this, makes contextual sense. Let's go with 20, make it a little bit brighter. Also, regarding shadows, we're going to enable contact shadows. Speaking of contact shadows, might as well enable ambient occlusion as well. Those go together like peanut butter and jelly. We have nice, crisp, sharp black in between our crevices now. So that's just gonna make a nicer quality render. All right, so lighting that's pretty much it. Just simple 3-point lighting. Now let's start to work on the world. All right, we can jump over to our shading tab. I like to turn the pass-through under viewport display on the camera. I like to change that all the way up to 1. I just don't I get very confused by seeing the things outside of the camera frame. And we don't need look dev preview. You also saw that I removed file browser and UV editor because we only need the shader nodes. No image textures will be harmed in the use. Oh, we already used one actually in the ground. So we've got, what am I looking at now? Oh, not the rendered version. We're looking at material preview. So we can, in our shader editor, jump to the world, and we're going to add a very stark gradient from outside of the frame. It's going to be basically a vignette, very dark, rich blue on the outside into a light, more turquoise in the middle. Let's add that with a texture, gradient texture, Control T. We're going to use the camera as the incoming texture coordinate. And so if we look at that by itself, we want to switch, you can see that we have a gradient down the center of the camera over to the right, but we want to use the spherical gradient again. And I need to figure out where it's at exactly. So let's move around our, okay, that's a little weird. How about Z? I feel like Z was, okay, you can start to see now that we're getting a gradient. All I'm really doing is just kind of moving around the frame. And camera is a little different because when we leave the camera view, we still see that world. So this is kind of like locked to however we're looking at the scene. And this will work fine for this particular setup, but it wouldn't work necessarily well if you have a certain animated camera angle. This is all tailored to being a turntable, by the way. And yes, so I think that's enough information that I want it to be a little more white in the center. Okay, so that's moving it up and down. Z kind of moves it forward and back. All right, so that works good. Let me make it smaller, 1.5. How about I just try with the converter color ramp? Let's move all these back. Let's make it B-spline. If you haven't caught on, B-spline to me has some of the smoothest fall-offs. So, when working with gradients, it comes in really handy. All right, so yeah, this is what I wanted. All right, so we're gonna have that black color is gonna be a really rich blue. Okay, I need to move it down a bit. Like this, okay. So the really rich blue, let's add that color. It's gonna be dark too, but extremely saturated. Then this color is going to be similar. Probably should have started with these flags rather than go from black to white. Maybe this one will be white. Okay, so we've got our gradient that represents the kind of ocean as a whole. All right, with a nice brightness in the back. So like the underside of the shark is showing up blue. I might want to move the area light a little bit. Okay, yeah, like that. There we go. Okay, so we're well on our way. We've got a world. Everything's starting to come together, but we've got a long way to go before it is an underwater type scene. I'm gonna quickly, something that bothers me about the ground is that it's reflective and I don't want it to be reflective. So I'm going to add a material quickly and we'll come back to the ground, but this will just be called ground. And the base color is gonna be dark, maybe even closer to blue. You know, not that the ground is blue in the ocean, but like I'm gonna lean towards blue so that all of it feels underwater. All right, I want to not eliminate, but significantly reduce the specularity on the ground. A little bit is fine, something like that. There we go. And then for our shark, okay, so yeah, I've kind of blocked out the ground material. We're gonna come back to that, but let's focus on the shark a bit now. Let's turn off our overlay so we can just see the shark. And first thing we'll do, switch over to the object context. Let's call this, let's see, default, let's call it shark. Simple enough. And let's see here. I know that my shark eyeball, okay, that had the shark material. Let's remove that and add a new material and call it eye, shark iris. All right, the iris is going to be dark. And, you know, maybe we'll swap this in for the other eye that we already created. I forgot that we wanted to do that. All right, but the specular is going to be, the roughness is going to be much shinier. So 0.1, now we see the area light showing up. We'll add the shark eye material to the teeth just because it would be the same material. All right, and now the shark body, which, you know, this should be a white color. So I think maybe my area light needs a little bit more energy. Let's double it to 40. There we go. Now the teeth and eyes are reading a little more like white. Back to the shark body. Okay, so with sharks, if we look at the Google, let's look up some sharks. Right, so most of them have a dark color on the upper half and white on the bottom. Let's introduce something similar to that. We can do that with the gradient texture. So texture gradient, Control T, and let's look at it by itself. All right, see the orientation of the gradient. We want to rotate. Let's see, I think we want to rotate. Oh, let's use the object coordinates, of course. There we go. All right, now it'll be really easy to see which way is rotated. All right, Y, we're gonna go -90. So we've got white on the bottom, black on top. And we want to wobbleize this, which now should be your cue that we are going to add a texture, noise texture, color, mix RGB, and make that line between the black and white a little funky. Let's change that to linear light. And there we go. We can start to get this sort of shape. Maybe move it down just a touch. Well, that's not working. How about Y? How about X? There we go. All right, that should work out pretty well. Converter, color ramp. Let's just tighten this edge a bit. Make it an ease interpolation. And all right, yeah, so we've got the upper and lower half. Let's incorporate that into the color of the principal BSDF. See what that looks like. All right, we don't quite want it black, so let's take that up in value to more of a gray. We just want to, you know, subtly hint at this coloration. And the bottom looks pretty good, I think. Maybe make it a little bit darker. I kind of want, let me look at the camera. I kind of want the world to be illuminating my scene a bit more. I don't want the underside of the shark to be so dark. So let's go over there. This is something I do a lot, where I duplicate the background. Let me save the scene and add an input light path. Also a shader mix shader node. All right, so I'm going to plug both of these backgrounds into the mix shader and then use the camera ray as the factor. So when I do that, the scene will use whatever is in slot 1. All right, so that's the background at level 1 strength. But in the second slot, that's what the camera sees. So I actually want the camera to see what we have, but I want the world to experience more energy. So I'm going to hit 2, and now we can see that the shadows start to brighten a bit. Something like this. Yeah. Okay, so this is just a way that you can independently control what the world is showing the camera versus what the world is contributing to the scene. All right, that's looking pretty good. What is next for the shark? I think the upper side maybe needs a little less dark. Let's go back to the object and yeah, make the color a little bit brighter. Yeah, something like that. Just subtly implying that transition from dark to light on the shark's body. Okay, I think the next key component is going to be the fake caustics. We're not actually rendering caustics. I don't think Eevee can do that at all. So we're going to fake it with a Voronoi texture. So with our shark body, let's start to create that fake caustics effect. Shift A, let's add a texture, Voronoi texture. Also shade smooth the shark. I meant to decimate this, but I messed that up. This is too heavy. I wish I had decimated it earlier, but I don't want to wait on that. Save the scene, maybe jump up a new version. So the Voronoi texture, if we take a look at that, we're going to do something a little bit different this time around. And that is something I learned from Simon Toms. He's an incredible node network material person, creates ridiculous things with nodes. Lampel had him on a live stream, and in that live stream, he did this thing that I'm going to show you, which is we're going to use the object texture coordinates. We're going to shift control duplicate the Voronoi node. And I'm going to add another reroute node there just so it makes it a little clearer. Then we're going to change the bottom one to be F1, or smooth version of F1. And then we're going to add a converter vector math position. We're going to combine the positions as a distance operation. Now, no idea why this works, but what it does do is creates the Voronoi texture, but isolates the edges specifically, okay? Better than normal. If I, to give you an example, if we add a color ramp, take the distance and plug this up and try and get just the edges, like we can't do it. You can see that the circles start to encompass the Voronoi pattern. And if we try it with B-spline, we can get a little bit closer. I basically want all the lines here that we see in the pattern to be like level 1 white and the darkness to be level 0 black, but you can't do that unless you use this method over here from Simon. And so with that established, we get a much more concentrated version of the Voronoi pattern. And this is going to look way better for caustics. All right, something like this. Next, we're going to add a vector mapping node. And we're going to stretch this. We're going to stretch it in the Z value. So if we take this all the way down to Z, that's going to stretch the caustics vertically 100%. And this is realistic because, the caustics are coming from the ocean surface above. It's not going to be projected onto the object from all angles. It's going to come from a top-down type view. And so stretching in Z is how we do that. You don't necessarily have to go to 0. I might massage it a bit and go to like 0.2 or something like that. But make it significantly stretched. The next thing we need to consider is that the caustics are only hitting the upper surface of the object. Again, coming from above. What we're going to do here is use a converter separate X, Y, Z. All right, so this can take an incoming texture coordinate, which is 3D data, so the X, Y, and Z vector data, and we can take the normal of our object, and if we shift control click, we look at the X normal data, that's left to right, Y is front to back, and then Z is top to bottom. All right, so this kind of creates a poor man's light effect, as if a spotlight is shining from above, and we're going to use that as a mask to limit our caustics to just be on the upper side, any surface that's facing upward. You've also probably seen this trick used for like adding snow to something. You only want snow to appear on the upper side of an object, that kind of thing. And we're doing the same sort of effect here. So if I simply multiply it with color mix RGB and change the operation to, you can't really see that, multiply. All right, let's use that Z value. Shift control click on it. And we want the multiply to be all the way up to 1. All right, so now we're limiting where those caustics can appear, only on the upper side of any surface. Let's see, I do want to actually manipulate this slightly. Let's add a color ramp to this one. And let's try ease. I don't really like the stark fall off. You know, it just kind of cuts off at a sharp edge. I want it to be a little more subtle. Something like this. All right, caustics. The caustic factor is in play now. And, you know, you could plug this up into the emission. I don't know. I find that it's a little more cumbersome to work that way. Let's see what it looks like. It should just add a white level glow to that, to where the caustics are. But I actually want these to have a little bit of blue. Yeah, and I want them to be, I want to have control over how strong the emission is. So that's, I'm not going to use the emission value. I'm just going to simply mix another shader, emission shader into it. Shader, mix shader. Now, remember back in the day when, before the principled BSDF, we would have to build every material in individual components. It never really seemed like that annoying of a task, but now, like, I couldn't go back. I wouldn't want to go back. All right, now let's take that factor that we created. Let's take it out of the emission into the factor. And here we go. All right, so now as separate components, I can select the color that I want, slightly blue, and then adjust the strength. Let's say 5. That looks fairly believable as caustics. Yeah, and that's the effect. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, here's a problem though. Since the caustic mask, the factor is not minding the shadows of our object, you have this issue where caustics are appearing like out of this really deep crevice, and that looks bad. So one more time, I'm going to multiply an input ambient occlusion node, and this we're going to use as another factor to multiply. Let's add a converter color ramp, and if we just increase the darkness in there, maybe as a B-spline. There we go. All right, so that should eliminate any caustics from the contact shadow positions, crevices in other words. So let's just duplicate this multiply since it's the same operation. Now if we look at that, all right, so if we see before, we had caustics under in that crevice, and now they're not. All right, so let's plug that into our factor. All right, overall, it definitely looks better in that area, but the caustics kind of lost some energy, so let me increase their strength to like 10. And then I think there's really just one more thing I want to do with the caustics. Couple more things. I want to make them wiggly and blurry. So wobbly, that's the word I want to use. So we're going to add I think we've already done that up here somewhere. Yeah, let's just duplicate this. Shift Control D to duplicate. And we want to use the object coordinates from here. All right. So this, we're going to manipulate. What am I going to manipulate? Oh yeah, the Voronoi. That's what I want to manipulate up here. All right, so we're going to take that factor into there. Nice. Right away, that's kind of what I wanted. Yeah, so it just, you know, wobbles out the lines, kind of gives them squigglies, and that is much more believable as caustics. And then the only other problem that I have with the caustics is that they're extremely sharp in their center and where they're most bright. And I want to blur this, so I'm going to duplicate these same nodes. And this gets a little bit compact in here, so let me try and make this a little more readable. I'm going to blur the outgoing mapping data. And if you use a noise texture at a really, really high value, all right, so the scale value, let's let it compile and I'll show you how this works. This is like a poor man's blur. Right, so I was going to take the noise texture, I mean really high value, like 10,000, all right? And that's going to essentially blur it. Now, the closer we get, you can see that it's just really high noise frequency, but when you look from the camera angle, it's going to work out as a blurred version. So we can decrease the factor, and that will serve as decreasing the amount of blur. So we just want a little bit of blur. All right, that's more believable right there. Increase, where is it? Increase the strength to like 20. Maybe that's even a little too much blur. I'm getting lost in my nodes. All right, so let's go to 0.02. There we go. I think that's pretty good. All right, so we have this caustics component added to our shark, but it makes sense to also add that to our ground. So let's do it. We can simply copy all of this. I believe copy all of this. Let's take the texture node, the texture coordinate node with it. Also the emission and the mix shader. I think all of these can go. Control copy. Let's save our file. And let's select the ground material, Control V. Let's just leave it where it's at because that makes sense. All right, and we will plug in the ground into slot 1 of the mix shader. And this should apply caustics just all over the ground. We will then want to use a couple textures to isolate where the caustics appear. But make sure that I'm using, yeah, okay, we're using all of that. I guess I don't need these reroutes anymore. There we go. So I want to limit the caustics on two factors. Number one, I don't want any caustics underneath the shark. The shark would be blocking that light and also the caustics. So I want to eliminate that. And then also I want a generic noise pattern so the caustics aren't uniformly all across the surface. So the ground. So let's add first a noise, Shift D to duplicate this. Let's see, we'll start down below. I guess I could move these up as well. We're going to use, again, the object coordinates. Let's plug that into the vector of the noise. Shift, right click, and drag to create a new reroute. All right, this noise, if we look at it by itself, it's just going to be a generic black and white noisy patchy pattern. So if we make the scale like 2 or maybe like 0.2, and then add a converter color ramp, this is going to create a splotchy pattern that will, where the white will have the caustics visible and the black will not. Let's make it, how about 0.4? Something, maybe a little bit bigger actually, 0.6. Something more like this. Okay, so we've got, the white is where the caustics will appear if we simply multiply another mix RGB node. Okay, so what I'm trying to do is like gradually add more black to the factor so that there's less and less caustics. So the first element is to eliminate it on a general noise pattern, and the next will be to eliminate it specifically under the shark. All right, let's take a look at this. Question, is it possible to animate those caustics? Yes, in my turntable, I animated the caustics. All you have to do is adjust the mapping node. So if we rotate an X, yeah, so you can see that like rotating either an X or what about Y, like you can easily get a believable caustic effect in animation. So very effective. Looks like a foamy ocean. Well, we're actually going to add some plant life onto the floor. So this generic noise pattern serves to also imply that there's shadows being cast from the plants. So we'll get there pretty soon, but that starts to look pretty realistic. And actually, we kind of got away with, like, there's no caustics underneath the shark. I think just because our noise pattern happened to do that. So if you run into that problem yourself, all you need to do is add a texture, gradient texture, our trusty gradient texture. Use the object coordinates, add a mapping node. Let's look at it by itself, and it should appear as a spherical gradient right under the shark because that's the center of the object too. If we turn on our origins, that's the center of the object. So all you have to do here is increase the size, make that a converter color ramp, switch it around, flip the color ramp, make it so that the black is very distinct. All right, this is your cutout for where the caustics will not appear, and you just need one more multiply node. So yeah, pretty simple if your caustics are still appearing underneath the shark. Nice. Okay. So caustics on the ground, caustics on the shark. So far, like we're making good progress, but it still doesn't feel like underwater. A volume component is what's going to make it feel like it's underwater, and that's where the image gets really interesting. So we are going to add a mesh cube and make it encompass our scene. All right, just make it, yeah, encompass it. I will change the display to be, the viewport display to be a wire. That way it never gets in the way of when we look in shaded view. Material preview rendered. All right, so this cube, let's call it volume. And let's put our lights into a group, or lights and camera. Move to a new collection, call it render. Yeah, that's fine, whatever. The volume, we're going to create a new material. Call it volume. Since there's only gonna be one, you know, it's pretty straightforward. We're going to eliminate the principled BSDF and add a shader, principled volume. This is gonna go in the volume socket, not the surface socket. And right away we get a semblance of a very thick fog. Let's turn the density down, way down, and you can see that this is the type of depth that we want in the scene. However, the generic gray color is not what we want. We are going to copy the color from the world instead. So let's go to our world. In this situation, we're going to copy, Control C, and go back to our object, and we're going to paste that. We're taking this information and we're going to plug it into our color information of the principled volume. All right, now if we increase the density, we're going to notice that we get a very dark version. And in my experience, the camera just does not work quite as well for the texture coordinates, but if we use window, that does tend to work a little bit better. But we need to reset our mapping. So let's delete, hit the backspace key, and now we can see that our bright color is appearing in the window. So if we go to the camera, we just need to move it to the center. Maybe scale it down. Massage these flags a bit. Okay, this is what I want. It mirrors what we have in the world. Now let's let's duplicate this gradient, Shift Control D, and we'll backspace it to reset it. This is how we're going to control the density. All right, if we plug it in by itself, it's most dense in the center of the frame, and it gets less and less dense towards the outside. But if we flip it, flip the color ramp, now it's less dense on the inside. So where the shark is, we can switch to B-spline. All right, and we can artistically choose how dense the volume is closer to the shark. And then for the white, we don't want it to ever be like fully white. Drag that value down. But now we're starting to get the volume in play, and the depth of the scene is really improving. Let's turn off our overlays. Now it's starting to feel a little bit more like an underwater scene. And I really actually do want it to be quite dense around the edges. So let's increase that. Nice. Cool. It has this kind of spotlight effect on the shark that I really like. So now it starts to look like it's underwater. One thing that I want to change in the volumetrics is let's increase the tile size to 4. I find that you'll see that the shadows kind of increase their sharpness and authenticity. We can enable volumetric shadows, and that really just sort of, in this scene, kind of darkens stuff. But I'm going to enable it. And samples, you know, we can go to 128, especially for like when we render it. But it's nice that we get these kind of God rays from the lights themselves through the volume. Eevee volume, I absolutely love adding that. Right, so I mentioned God rays. Let's go ahead and add that into the volume as well. So this is going to be a completely faked effect. We're going to add another gradient. Let's just duplicate, Shift Control D to duplicate these. Shift right click to drag out a reroute node. And this time we're going to use a linear gradient. Let's reset the node, the mapping node. Shift Control click on, oh, I don't want to do that. Shift Control clicking in a volume shader does not really do what you want. So let's just plug that in, incorporate it how we're going to do that finally, is with an input, color mix RGB node. And we're going to make it an add. The add operation. All right, so the add is going to take any bright colors, like closer to white, and add them to the value underneath. Any dark colors will be, added. If it's a 0 black, 0 will be added to that value. So it's a way to add brightness a lot of times. So by default, we have a black gradient from left to right, screen left to right. We can manipulate this then if we add a converter color ramp. Oh, and I want that feeding into this add node. All right, so you can imagine if the gradient is from left to right, that perfectly mirrors what we see in the color ramp. And if we want to add some God ray type effects, we're going to add another black flag and flip it. All right, so now you can see directly what's happening in the viewport. And so we can create, this is like a single shaft of God rays going right down the middle. We could rotate this in the Z-axis, I believe. Yeah, Z-axis, move it to the left. All right, so now we've got this God ray started, but we can add as many flags as we want, take several black flags, take several white flags in between, and we're starting to create these rays. If we use B-spline, that's going to be a little bit more reasonable, I feel like. All right, you can choose however many God rays you want. This is where you can have fun with your artistry. I think something along these lines works pretty well. And then I want another gradient component because I don't want the God rays just to go all the way across the image. I want them to fall off towards the bottom of the image. So let's duplicate this gradient and we'll start over. And this time we'll just use it from bottom to top. Again, I tried to use Shift-Control-Click. But we want to actually color. Let's just plug it straight into the color of the overall volume. All right, nice. All right, so we can rotate this. Okay, we're gonna go -90. All right, add a converter color ramp. That's gonna go into the color, and then we're going to define black on the bottom and white on top. All right, so we'll use an ease color ramp type. Okay, now we're limiting the amount on the bottom with which we can then multiply right here. And now this plugged into the color, you should see the God rays fade out towards the bottom, which they do. Move them a little bit, whoops. There we go. So hopefully you can tell that all these individual components are working together. God rays, volumetric, mist, caustics, blue gradient world, all of them are starting to come together and it's reading like an underwater scene. Okay, so we've saved the new version of the scene. Let's talk about the plant life. We are going to use particles to grow plants out of the ground. We'll switch to solid mode for a quick rabbit trail into basic modeling. We're going to add a mesh cylinder with 8 vertices. All right, keep this geometry very simple. Let's tab into local view, turn on our overlays again. All we're gonna do here is S-Shift-Z. We're gonna make a skinny tube. And this tube is gonna be like a stylized type of plant for growing underwater. On the top, we're gonna Shift-S cursor to selected, and then tab to object mode and add a mesh cube. Scale it down, and then Control-1, because one level of subdivision will make it spherical, but have exactly 8 edges around the equator. And we will apply that. Tab into edit mode to sphere, hit 1. All right, now we've got a perfectly spherical version. And all I'm trying to do here is give a nice cap to the tube. And did I already delete the face? I think I did. And to combine, we need to combine them in object mode, Control J. Oh, I did not delete the center face. All right, now we can select upper and lower edge loops and vertex. Merge vertices by distance, and we'll make that like 0.01, maybe. Yeah, okay, we removed 8 vertices. That's exactly how I know all these have been connected. All right, so we've got this tube structure. We can Control R to create several cuts going vertically. Control R and mouse wheel up. Then we'll add a simple deform modifier. You may remember if we change it to bend, this is exactly what I want, just to have it, curve to one side, and we'll duplicate this around and create the whole plant. But you may remember that I moved the mesh upward so that the origin was towards the bottom of this tube. And that's why the bend modifier works kind of out of the box. All right, so we've got that. Let's duplicate it around. And from here, we can create any number of variations that we want, give it more or less bend, make it, stubbier or thicker, Alt-S. Let's see, if we Shift-C and put the cursor at the bottom, we can scale down. All right, so create a couple, that's actually probably a little too thick. Alt-S. All right, and from here, we can start to duplicate, rotate, scale, and reposition all of these. And after we do this enough times, we'll have a little bush. So if this was a recorded tutorial, this is where I would say,
and now I'm going to time lapse the rest of this because it's super boring to watch. But since this is live, you get to watch me do it all. This would be kind of a fun competition of who can model this the fastest and the best. And everybody times themselves and then we get rank time. Who did better? Sometimes speed modeling competitions would be fun. But I doubt I'd be winning this scenario. Make it a little more bendy. Really close, maybe just one more layer down low. I want to limit the intersection, but I know intersection's going to happen.
All right, I think that's going to be good. All right, select them all, object, convert to mesh, Control J, right click, shade smooth. This one I want to rotate a little differently. All right, so this is going to be our plant underscore tubes. We're going to hit Control 2 to add a subsurf modifier. They're going to be smoothed in the final render. Maybe make it 1 in the viewport, 2 in the render. Control S. All right, so we've got one plant modeled. Next, we want to do another plant. So we'll move this one off to the side. Shift A, add a mesh plane. Going to rotate 90 degrees. This one's going to be more of like a seaweed. So we will scale down. Actually, I want to move it up first. Scale down. Well, that was stupid. And we will elongate it. I'm going to scale to 0 at the top, but I'm not going to merge yet, because if I don't merge, I can still cut edge loops going up the center. So we'll cut one, move it up. Let's see. Something like this. We'll add a bunch of edge loops, and I'm going to, wait, what happened here? At this point, I can probably merge. Alt-M at center. All right, and I'm going to select alternating edges like this. All right, we'll move them that way. I'm going to rotate them one direction, Control-I to invert, deselect the top and bottom, rotate the other way. All right, so now we've got this kind of funky shape. Control-R to cut in the middle and move that backward in Y. All right, and then Control-2 will create our little seaweed. Same kind of scenario. We're going to add simple deform. Let's change it to bend. Exact same situation. But I'm also going to enable proportional editing and rotate this to give it a bit of a twist. Where's my little circle? There it is. Okay. Maybe I just need to go 180. All right, there we go. I just wanted the seaweed to kind of curl in on itself as it grew. All right, same drill.
Shift D, duplicate. Rotate a little bit, maybe decrease or increase the angle of the bend. Scale down. Shift D, duplicate. I wish there was a real life time lapse feature. That would be awesome. There are so many things. I guess that's where time travel fantasies come from and dreams of manipulating time. Anyway, I gotta get back to modeling this as fast as I can. Trying to, again, be mindful of intersection, but accepting that it's going to be there to some degree.
All right, I think we're going to call that a tuft of seaweed. We will turn off the subsurf modifier, Alt-click to turn it off for all of them. Object, convert to mesh, Control-J, plant weed, and then add Control to subsurf modifier. Okay, we've got our two plant types. Let's leave local view, / on the number pad, move them to a new collection. We'll call them plants. And the plants, okay, perfect. Maybe we'll group these two together. I keep saying group. Control M or just M. New collection ground. Okay. All right. So plants collection into the ground. That makes sense. Also, those plants, I'm going to move them down so they don't risk being rendered above, the ground here. I'm going to duplicate the ground. I need an emitter object, but I want it to be a lot less dense than the ground that we have currently. So I'm going to move this just barely below the other one. Let's look at our local view here. So with this duplicated ground, let's add a decimate modifier. And we're going to just change this to like, all I need is 2, 3, 4,000 polys. That's it. So let's go to 0.1 and it should decimate pretty quickly. This will just be an approximate version of our ground. And we're at 20,000. What? 0.01? There we go. My math is not worth writing home about. So let's apply that. We will call it ground underscore emitter. All right, now the particle system can work a little more optimally. Make sure that I have that below the surface. I don't want it intersecting with the mesh at all. All right, from here we can go to our particle settings and add a new particle system. We'll call this particles underscore plants. It is going to be a hair type of emitter. And right away, I'm going to go to the render settings and change from path, which is like, hair strands. And I'm going to make it a collection. We'll grab the plants collection. And it's going to randomly choose, probably a 50-50 ratio of the two different types of objects you have in there. However many types of objects, if you wanted 3 or 4 types of plants. But they're oriented wrong. And so what I need to do is go to the enable advanced settings and the rotation settings, enable those. And the orientation axis, I want to be object X. I don't know why this works because the object Z axis is up and down. I don't know why the strands seem to point X as vertical. I don't understand that, but all I know is that object X does work. We can randomize the rotation to our heart's content. Let's reduce the number to like 100. Oh, maybe more than that. Well, let's see. How does it look in the render? Okay, it actually looks a little more dense in the render from the render perspective. We can change the scale under the render tab where we chose our collection. We can increase the scale, and then I like to increase scale randomness as well, so we get a variety of plant sizes. Let's look at the rendered version. All right, so we've got our plants, but they look terrible as white shiny plastic. So let's add a material. I'm going to select both objects, create a material. We'll call it plants because they'll share the same material. Again, I'm not being too detailed with the plants. They're just selling the effect of being underwater. They're not meant to be focused on exactly. So the base color, I want to say I just darkened this. I'm trying to remember what I did earlier. And then also I want to add a little bit of subsurface. So let's go to like 0.5 subsurf. Nice. So you can see that start to glow, give it a little bit of a translucence, and maybe change the base color just slightly towards blue or green. Or is it the subsurface color? Okay, so the subsurface color definitely makes it more of a green. I don't really want it to appear like green, just more of like a darker blue to blend into the surrounding environment. Let's copy the material to selected. Now all the plants have it. I think that looks pretty good. As far as the emitting particles, let's go back to the ground emitter. And so if you want a different variety of the plants, you can just change the seed value. And what I'm looking for is a population where it doesn't intersect with the fins. I want them to definitely be separate from the fins. So maybe I could just move the whole thing down. There we go. That actually looks pretty good. Kind of blends in. I love how the fog, the volume kind of takes over. Yeah, that's actually looking really good. I like that. I think it sold the effect of being underwater a little bit, just a little bit more. The only thing left to do, let's see, I want some depth of field. So we'll go to our render camera and enable depth of field in the camera settings. So just tick that checkbox. And the default f-stop of 2.8 is pretty subtle typically. So let's make it like 0.5. All right, now we get a lot of blurring up front, a lot of blurring in the back. Oh, I need to establish where the focal distance is. So I in my viewport display on the camera, Let's enable limits, also the overlays in the viewport. And I'm looking for this little yellow crosshair right here. All right, so that is the focal distance, and I just want to pull that back in the focal distance setting to be at the front of the shark. All right, let's go back to rendered. How's that look? Maybe a little bit too strong in the depth of field. How about 0.8? Yeah, the only other thing I would want to do, one little compositing touch. So we'll save this. Let's render a full view 1920 by 1080. It should be the default settings. Let's render and watch how fast this happens. It should just be like a couple seconds. Yeah. 3.61 seconds. And all I want to do here, let me turn off my screen key thing. Yeah, I just want to add, if we switch over to compositing, now that we've rendered, we can enable the nodes. And I just want to add a distort lens distortion. Whenever you're underwater, the lens distortion tends to be a little more noticeable. Shift Control click on that so we can see it in the, let's maximize the view. So yeah, I'm gonna click fit and then change distortion and dispersion to 0.02. I think that's the value I liked. All right, so now we can see that the color channels are being separated. Right here, you can see if we turn it on and off. All right, that's underwater. That tends to also sell the underwater effect if you make that a little stronger. It happens in camera lenses in general. I think just refraction of like light through glass, it tends to happen. So camera lenses have it. You'll see me and other artists add this type of lens distortion to other renders outside of water just to get a more photorealistic look. Though photographers will tell you that that is an undesirable artifact of photography. And then you have CG artists who are trying to implement it so it looks more photographic. Anyway, I think that's it. That is the shark shading and lighting from the tutorial, from the trailer of the course. That's going to be all for today. Thank you for joining me. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. Thank you for watching.